Welcome to the Triskele podcast.
We are three druids gathered in a virtual grove
to share our thoughts and our path with you.
Hi, welcome to the Triskele podcast. This is episode 12. If you are a new listener or viewer, welcome to the podcast. And if you are a returning listener or viewer, welcome back. We are both on YouTube as well as I think pretty much all of the podcast apps. So you can listen to us or you can watch our lovely faces. Today, we're going to be talking about hobbies and how the hobbies that we have interact with our devotional work. But before we really dig into that, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Victoria, and my pronouns are she and her.
I'm Drum, and my pronouns are he and him.
And I'm Amber, and my pronouns are she and her.
So today we're going to talk about devotion and hobbies and how the two of those intersect. So I happen to know, because we've had conversations, that we have hobbies that intersect with our devotion. For myself, it's a lot of my yarn crafting, my knitting, my crocheting, my spinning, Drum. I know you've got running that you sort of work into your morning devotionals, which I think is amazing. So let's talk a little bit about what hobbies do we have that intersect with devotion? So maybe they're not solely for devotion, but we use them at times for devotion.
Well, one of the things I do is I run. It's something I did in the past and something I've picked up again this year. Basically, it's good for me. One of the prayers I say every day is, has the word exercise in it. So after saying these prayers enough, I thought, I should do more than just talk about it. I should actually do it. And so now I exercise while I say that prayer. And it's, there's a couple things that I really, really like to do, and that's garden or work with plants, and I like to run. And what I've discovered is that I do my morning devotionals while I run. And I didn't intentionally do that. It just was like, wow, this is a really good time to do this. And I'm running through the forest. And so it just seemed like this is a time to do my morning devotional. And it is, I think part of devotional practice is what you say and what you do. But I think the other important part of it is anchoring yourself in the moment. And when I go out there for a run, I mean, running is more than just moving my feet in front of me. It's really taking in the smell of the earth and the sky and those things around me. So it's really, it's really integrated as part of my life. These devotional practices are what I do, and then these other things are what I do, and they just seem to blend and work together.
I'm scratching my head purely because I tend to be a bit of a hobby hopper. I'm somebody who gets really, really excited to do something for a while, and then I get bored and I switch hobbies. So over the years, I've had lots of different hobbies that have become that sort of devotional act. I spent a couple years doing home brewing, so making like mead and beers and stuff in my garage, but using those as a way to connect to the kindred, and then later using those brews that I made as part of my ritual offerings, and I did ritual to make beer, and then the beer became the ritual, so it was this sort of like interwoven practice that I did. Through some of the ADF study programs, you're encouraged to plant seeds and watch the cycle of those plants as they go along. And so I did that for the first time as part of a study program. And this year, my family started a garden for the first time. And so that, something that started as a devotional grew into something that we're doing as a hobby. And so I've seen things go both directions, where it starts as a hobby and becomes devotional, or it starts as a devotional and just becomes a hobby. And like I said, that for me, that's varied a lot. Right now it's embroidery. That's my newest little fun ditty. But the only consistent thing, and I don't know that most people would qualify it as a hobby, but for me, that's study. I am a devotee of Athena, like that is, and have been since I was 10 years old. So scholarship is really, really important to me. Finding a new book, reading about a new subject is something that I really enjoy. I am 30 something years old and I still like take notes on textbooks that I'm reading just to have them, because it's something that I do for fun, but also it's a really important part of my spiritual path. So it's a mixed bag for me, and it's a lot of fun.
I know for me, I do a lot of yarn crafting. I used to brew, and interesting story about that. I started devoting brews to Carrigan, and then a couple of times I didn't, and the beer came out terrible. And it was flat, or it was off, or it was whatever, like just not really drinkable. And then I thought about it and I'm like, what is wrong? What am I doing wrong with this beer? I've done everything. I followed the recipe. And then it occurred to me, I never actually dedicated the ingredients to Carrigan. So I did that the next batch. Came out great. It became a really clear, like, did I remember to do this dedication or not? Depended on whether the beer came out well or not. These days, I live in a tiny apartment, and we don't have a lot of space for brewing. So I have, I've been knitting and crocheting and spinning my own yarn for many, many, many years. I'm older than Amber. I've been doing it for a long time. Almost as long as Amber's been alive in some cases. I started really young, and it has become a devotional act in a lot of cases. So I have a piece that sort of sits just over my shoulders. I can kind of like wrap around and I can pin it together at my neck. That was spun at a goddess ritual in a drop spindle while I was walking around and in all of the workshops. And I intentionally spun all of the energy of that festival into it. And then I crocheted it into a collar. It's not big enough to be a shawl, but it's a large collar. And for a while I was using that piece when I would do meditations or trance work, because it's so connected for me. I've also done pieces as devotional offerings and votive offerings. There is nothing quite like the energy you put into making a blanket to be like, this is a really big offering. It was for a really big thing. And it's just, I find it interesting how these activities that we do, whether it's study or it's running or it's knitting, crocheting and spinning, and that could be completely mundane, they really do sort of take on this extra meaning, this extra feeling when you do it as a devotional. Or maybe your beer just comes out. But what do you guys think of that?
No, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the brewing. I've done some brewing. I don't drink, so I mean, for me it was an exercise in just doing it. And what I found when I did it was I wanted, because the person who taught me how to do it would put like runes in their brews. I decided that I would put Ogham in the things that I made. So what I would do is, if I was making a plum wine, is I would draw Ogham, carve Ogham into the plums, and then add them in, so that it became part of the process. And one of the things that I would do was I offered my brews to the Dagda because of his cauldron. And I would also sing a song as I was making the mead or the brew or whatever it was. And the songs would always differ. They were kind of impromptu. I don't remember any of them because they were kind of in the moment things. But I think that it helped the brew. At least I'd like to think so. Or at least the deity was helping me to make the brew. I love the idea of doing that, and I'm glad other people have mentioned it here, because it's something I've been wanting to do again, and something I'd like to do it once again, because I think that it's a growing process, and I think our devotionals don't have to be momentary devotionals. They can be long-term, or what I call long-term devotionals, or what I call passive devotionals. I do a lot of working with, I do a lot of candle work. And so what I do is I take candles and I carve an intent or a prayer or something into the candle. So as the candle burns, it releases that intent or that prayer. And because the candles I get usually burn all the way down. So it's kind of a passive kind of thing. I light it, I'm in the room, and over a course of an hour or so, or 2 hours or 2 days, it's gone. So it's kind of I get to burn my candles, which I really like, and it releases a prayer.
No, I've also for sure used different hobbies as ways to create offerings actually to different deities and beings. So for the clergy training program, one of the things that you do is you build a relationship with the gatekeeper as you work along the way. And I wasn't sure who I wanted to work with. There's a lot of options in the ADF spectrum for the different beings that you could work with. And so I don't consider myself an artist. Let me start there. But I started drawing in pencil on wood to make essentially plaques of the different deities that I wanted to work with to kind of build that relationship. And they took me time. Again, I don't consider myself an artist. So they were hard works, but when I got them to a point that I was proud of them, it felt really special and important to have these pieces. Don't laugh at my art. I have one sitting over here. So like Giannis Potter is one that I thought about working with. And so I made this wooden plaque that's, his two faces. And it's colored pencil on wood. It's not fancy, but for me, it was really important. And so now it's something that I can use on my altar if I'm doing a ritual, that can be my representation of the deity. But I also feel like it helped me connect with them. So I think that there's a lot of really powerful option in hobby to make those connections, which is really cool.
I think there's a lot to be said for the repeating of doing something while you're thinking about a deity or you're thinking about a spirit or an intention, right? Even so in knitting or in crochet, doesn't matter which, or in spinning, right? It takes you a while to do a thing. It takes me a couple of weeks to knit a pair of socks over time. And if every time I sit down, I am thinking about the intention that I'm trying to put into that thing, or it takes months to make a blanket. And so I'm thinking about the intention that I'm putting into that thing, then that adds to it, right? All that intention gets put into it. This shawl, which is back here, you guys can see just barely in the corner. For those of you on audio, it is a knit shawl with a brown background and fall colored leaves sort of coming from the center. And this is my Carrie shawl. This is done for Carrigan. And it was intentionally done. The yarn was spun that way, and the shawl was knit that way. And it's not a precious object. It's something I use on a regular basis. Also, I'm slightly vain and I get lots of really good compliments when I wear it. So, that helps. It's a really nice piece. But that, all of the work and effort that went into that, every time I see it, every time I wear it, I think about that connection. Right? I think about, this is the work, this is the effort that I put into this piece for this being. And so it's almost like that passive magic drum that you were talking about, that I put all of this effort and intention into it to start with. And now that gets reinforced every time I see it, just because it brings to mind all of those things that went into it and into making it. So it just kind of reinforces itself over time, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. I know that, Amber, I think that the Giannis Pater that you have there, I think it's beautiful. It's very, very nice. And I did one of the guild study programs, the artisan program, and I did all the coursework over a period, of a reasonable amount of time. And then there was some line drawings that I had to do. And that took me years and years to do, because I'm really not an artist. It was really hard for me to draw. And so I had an idea in mind of what I wanted to draw, and I kept working on it. And really never really accomplishing that task. But I kept working on it, and because I wanted to make an image of Manannan McLear. And one weekend, I don't know what happened. The planets were right, the seas were right, whatever the case were. I actually drew it, and it was like I was like stunned. You know, for me, it was like a really cool thing because I actually finally created this thing I'd worked so long on, and I was very pleased with it because it was the result of a long-term devotional attempt. So devotional practices don't have to be effective immediately. Sometimes you have to build on them, and so I was kind of happy that worked out. And it was I don't know if I could ever do that again, but I do have it. I'm working on a book of Manannan McLear, and I'm putting that picture in there.
Well, and that's one of the so I've also done the Artisans Guild study program. And one of the things that it does that I think is really cool is that it encourages you to build that devotional relationship as part of the work. So when you start the program, essentially you choose a deity that is related to art in some way, and you use the study program to create artistic things, but they're created as a way to build that relationship with the deities. So essentially that whole study program is based on the idea of what we're talking about today. And it encourages you to try different mediums to explore, try if you're going to do like colored pencils for one, maybe make clay sculptures with the other, like make sure that there's things that may not be the same so that you can explore a little bit and maybe learn something new to foster that relationship. So it was a really cool practice. For that one, I actually dabbled in some clay work, which was a lot of fun. And then I did leather working. I made some like flower rosettes. My great grandmother was actually a leather smithing saddle maker. Like she made purses and saddles and all these beautiful works. So it felt really interesting. I have her tools, like her original leatherworking tools, to break those out and use those to create my own art in a way that I'd never done before. So it was a really beautiful experience. And I agree, it's not easy. Like, I think we're all our own worst critics. I look at my honest potter and I'm like, oh, kind of looks like my 11-year-old drew it. But, others can see beauty in it. And, the Artisan Skill kind of asks you to step outside of yourself and see beauty in what you're creating. So
I'll admit I have not done that program because the line drawings scare me.
Oh, yeah.
Also, they ask you to learn new things, and I'm like, I pretty much tried everything I'm willing to try. So I have to come up with something else, although I haven't done leatherworking, so maybe there's that. But yes, I am also a serial hobbyist. The yarn crafting stuff has just stuck, but I have done most other things that I'm willing to try that, don't involve like a kiln or a forge. I don't have access to those.
That's a definite hang up.
They would not let me put a kiln in my apartment.
Rude.
I can't imagine why they wouldn't let me do that.
No barbecues on the patio, no kilns in the living room.
Too much electrical draw. I don't know. I'm not actually that surprised. But my mom has a kiln, however. She had to get extra wiring put into her place to get that working. But anyhow, I come from a very crafty family. So are there any, I think the answer to this is yes, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there hobbies that you do that are purely devotional, or that you have done that are purely devotional?
For me, that's for sure a yes.
Yeah, I think I'd say yes to that as well. I can think of one in particular.
Would you care to elucidate?
Absolutely. When I was a younger pagan and had a mentor, my mentor talked to me. Through my mentor, I talked to someone who made runes, and they explained the way they made runes, and it's more than just construction or assembly. There's actually devotion that goes into it. And so I listened very carefully to what they had to say. And I've made lots of rune sets and Ogham sets and other sets over the years. And I've included those practices in there. It used to be that when I taught my Ogham course, first off, I would make a set of Ogham for each student that I had and give them that set of Ogham. And I would make it out of Sculpey or Fimo, just in case I could use my hands with it. And then I mentioned that methodology to Rhiannon, which she also incorporates in the works that she does as well. So it's it's a creation of sacred tools, effectively, and with devotion as kind of the backbone of that. And I think it makes for a more effective tool. Can you do an Ogham reading with lemon slices? Absolutely. But can you do an Ogham reading with devotional tools that has been crafted in a certain way? Yeah, absolutely as well. They last longer than lemon slices too.
They do, until you throw them on the floor and lose them under the bookshelf. Have no idea where that experience would ever come from. Being that I own multiple versions of your sets because of said accidents.
Yes.
What about you, Amber? You said you had one that was devotional.
I mean, for me, that's been a lot of them because, like, as I work through study programs, I always pick up something that I'm like, hey, I should try that thing. And I do that thing. And it ends up being, a devotional act that's also a crafty thing. The easiest one to come to mind is actually crafting with Sculpey, making essentially altar pieces. I think you may have both seen them. I made a little representation of a fire pit. I've made a well. They're made out of Sculpey, so they're perfect for places where you can't have an actual fire or water or whatever. I don't play with Sculpey otherwise, unless I'm making something that I need to have. It's sticky and it's weird, and I don't like the texture, but it looks really pretty, so it works. So when I do it, it's definitely a devotional act. It is not something I do for fun.
I have to admit, all my hobbies are both devotional and not. Although I guess my brewing did really turn into it was always a devotional act. And I do want to get back to brewing mead, which I used to do eons ago when I was in college and in the SCA. And that I can actually do in my tiny apartment. And that will probably be a devotional act again every time, because I've now learned one should devote one's ingredients and one's process in order to get a good result. So it's been drilled into me, hit over the head with a cauldron. I get it. At least for me, not for everybody. But it's been really interesting that whole sort of the difference as I make pieces that are intentionally devotional, or I make pieces that are accidentally devotional. So I have, the shawl is not hanging up on my decorated background here, but it is, so I have a shawl that I wanted to make a shawl with hand spun yarn. And I saw this fiber on Etsy or some online site. And it was beautiful. And by the time I reached out to the person who had blended it, they were sold out. And they said, well, tell me what you want, and I'll blend you a custom set of fiber. So if you're anybody who's a spinner or a yarn crafter knows that, like, if somebody will blend you exactly what you're looking for, that's amazing. And so I was like, okay, I want this percentage of this kind of wool and this kind of wool, and I want it to be this color, and I want it to have sparkles in it, and I want this, 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 and this. I gave her like strict instructions. No idea what I was going to use it for. So I get 6 ounces of this fiber. And up on my Ravelry feed pops this amazing looking shawl. The title of the shawl is Freya. It's the name of the shawl. It's the name of the pattern. So I have a Freya in golden yarn that I spun and I made. And it was sort of, I didn't buy the yarn buy the fiber with the intention of it being a devotional act, and I didn't spin it with the intention of it being a devotional act, but it sure turned into one, because making that shawl was a devotional act. a very intentional action. And that yarn, now I have a little bit of it left over, is now put aside, and it only gets used for devotional stuff. So it was interesting how it became devotional, or maybe it was devotional, and I just didn't recognize it at the beginning. You know how sometimes that goes, you're like, just gut check, this feels right. And then you're like, oh, that's why I did that. All right, cool. And you kind of move on.
I like the idea of it accidentally or unintentionally devotional. I think that there's some power there. I think about one of my cats, Daisy, loves to play with ponies, ponytail holders. And one day we have a drawer that has ponies in it and like things for the hair. And Daisy gets in there often. And so one day I go into the room and Daisy has gotten things out, and there's this like kind of abstract diagram on the floor. And so I look down at it, and Daisy goes up to it and she like moves a couple of pieces, you know, and I'm not going to ascribe any, you know, magic or anything to it, but she just moved a couple of the pieces she put down there. And it was this perfectly abstract Earth Mother drawing. And so I took a picture of it and I put it in the recently re-released A Tree for the Earth Mother book, has a picture of Daisy in it as one of the contributing artists, and it has that picture in there. And so it became kind of an unintentional feline devotional, you know, accidental act. That it's an Earth Mother. It's like it flabbergasted me. And so I didn't do that devotional act. I just kind of walked in on it as it was being created by the artist. But it's interesting to see that. And I also, some of the gardening that I do is the same way. I used to have plants, basil plants and rosemary plants that I would put out, you know, in the summertime, and I would bring in the wintertime. And I had some that lasted a decade. And so for me, it was an act of building a relationship and devotion to the plant, in watering it and caring for it. And you know, nothing lasts forever. And so after 10 years or 12 years, you know, the plant was no more. But I felt that there was this, you know, strong bond and this, you know, kind of devotional activity between nature spirit and myself that went on as we, you know, I did the work with the plant and the plant did the work of being a plant.
Definitely. I mean, sometimes I'm a little bit dense. I'll say that. So the other art style that I chose to work with as I did the artisan study program was loom weaving. And I've never, like, I can't crochet, I can't knit, like it's not my jam. So I bought myself like a little, like seriously, a children's loom, like small. I didn't know what I was gonna.
Got a bunch of those. They're not just kids' looms.
I felt like a little kid. It had little pegs in it. It was great. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to make with this, but this isn't going to be my thing, because you had to essentially take like progress pictures as you went along and show how that was building and all that fun stuff. So I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to build? So I've got a loom and I find a pattern of an owl, and I love owls. Owls are my favorite animals. They're so cool. So I'm like, cool. So I'm doing loom weaving and I'm making an owl and I'm sitting here and I get it done and I'm like, this is amazing. And then I look up and realize, Amber, you're a devotee of Athena. How dumb are you? You just did a whole weaving project with an owl in it. Duh. Like, it took you months to do this. How did you not know what you were doing? I was like, oh yeah. So needless to say, it was an offering. But at the time, that wasn't the plan. I wasn't like, I'm going to make a thing for Athena. Like, it just subconsciously, that's what happened. So
also owls.
Also owls. I have so many owls. I don't need more owls. I mean, I do, but I don't.
Oh, I know that challenge. I think we have come to the end of this topic, unless there's anything else that folks want to add to that.
This is a really good discussion because it showed, you know, different ways of looking at devotion and hobbies and how they intersect. And sometimes, you know, they kind of creep up on you and, you know, you're unaware. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, here we go. And so, yeah, I'm glad I got to hear what you what you do, because it helps me to understand better some of the things that I do.
And I think now I am plotting some various devotional pieces on my pin looms, but yes.
Well, and I think that that's one of the really cool things about this type of discussion is that, you know, there's this idea that devotionals have to be like these large, grandiose rituals or whatever, that they have to be these huge undertakings in order to be good enough. And I'm using air quotes that you can't see, but this type of conversation shows that no, it can be something you're doing anyway. You know, I'm a big proponent for that. If you can make a devotional while you're making coffee or sewing or coloring in a coloring book or you know, whatever it is that you're doing, all of those things can be devotional acts. It's just the intent that you're putting into that work. And that's really important. And I think that it's good for people to hear that it doesn't have to be a full core ritual to be valid.
Right. I mean, there's so many different things you can do as devotion. I know folks who do martial arts, and that is, they dedicate the sweat and the exercise and the energy that they put into those martial arts classes to usually a warrior god or goddess or spirit, or their ancestors, but that becomes a devotional act for them, right? It's not like, it's stuff that they might do anyway. Most of the pieces that I've made that are devotional pieces are either things that I will wear, and so will be reminded of the being that I made the thing for, or they're pieces that I will use in ritual. So I've made a number, like my altar cloths are all hand sewn or knit or crocheted. This one back here is actually an altar cloth, but I needed things to decorate my background. So this is for work. This is I get to have a bit of me. You get to see a bunch of my knitted stuff, and they rotate around periodically. But like, it's stuff that I would make. I'd make it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But adding that extra layer of devotion into it makes it extra special, right? And then you get that sort of that constant reminder every time you look at it. You're like, yeah, I made this for this thing. I made this for this purpose. I did this for this reason. Yeah. It just adds that extra layer of stuff.
It's almost like wearing like a special piece of jewelry or something. Mm-hmm. It's that, like, would you wear the jewelry anyways? Maybe, but you know, having a purpose or a reason behind wearing it, it's a reminder every time you have to take it off or put it on, you know.
I also think that whole process, that creative process, is really a big part of fertility, the virtue of fertility. I think that's really, really huge. And I think mm-hmm. that by doing those things, it becomes a devotional act. And you know, sometimes if we step back and look, a lot of the things that we do fall into that category. You can do one thing, only one thing, and that's a devotional act, and that's fine. But I think sometimes if we take a look at what we do, we may be surprised by you know, the number of things that we do that have that devotional kind of hum to it.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about it, I mean, I made mince pies the other day. First time I made mince pies. I've only ever eaten mince pies when my grandmother made them. She's passed. And so that was this devotional act to my ancestors, right? And then I made mini mince pies, and one of them went on the ancestor altar to share. But this is like, the entire time I was making those, I was thinking about those emotions of being at my grandparents' house and being with them, and that environment of care and caring that they provided. And so it was a devotional act, and I hadn't thought about it at the time, but because I had all of that intention and that memory, and I was just constantly evoking those memories, it really was a devotional act to my ancestors. Same with making a pilau. I made a pilau. Pilau is a Trinidadian dish. It's basically rice, chicken, and beans, and pumpkin. And the woman who helped my mother raise me passed away, and I made that the night of her funeral. And that was an intentional devotional piece. I made it because I'm like, I'm going to build this thing that she taught me how to make, that she would normally make. And so just cooking can be devotional acts. Running can be a devotional act. I mean, anything that you're doing, if you put the intention and the thought behind it, can become a devotional act.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and I think, again, that's why I love this conversation, because it shows that, you know, I mean, cooking for sure. I actually have a Bridget shrine next to my stove intentionally for that reason. As a, you know, it's a nice quick glance over of like, oh, I'm cranky and cooking supper. Maybe I should focus on something a little bit less cranky, you know, that it helps bring me back. And it's a reminder that, hey, even in the mundane, like, find that spirituality, find your center, find a way to connect with the universe. And some days it's easier than others, of course. But
yeah, that's beautifully put. Thank you.
I think we have come to the end of the episode, and it's time now for us to take a look forward into what's happening next week.
Just happened to have this here since we had our Sears discussion
Parlor
the other day. Yes, Sears Parlor. I've chosen 3 Ogham, and here's what they have to say. The first Ogham is Own. And Own is the I think it's the Ogham of discernment. It talks about making, about choosing correctly. There are many things that we see while we're walking the path, and we can only carry so many of them. So I think that the task here is to be discerning, and to use those things, or to pick up on those things that will serve you best. The second Ogham in the Colin Murray system is called More, and it represents the sea. It represents the end of a long journey and the beginning of another journey. Perhaps that speaks a little bit to this time of year, the time of the summer solstice. The sun has made a long journey, and now it's about to take a pause. Since it's the ocean, the idea is the question arises when you get to the shore: where do I go next, and what do I do next? You know, do you move? Do you cross the water? Do you turn back and go back the other way? So I think the choice there is what we have to do. And I think moving forward is also a good idea. The sun is going to do that, so maybe we should do that too. And finally, the last home is Quirt, the apple tree, which to me is a choice of beauty. We're given a number of choices, and those choices are good choices. So we can choose one, or choose the other, or choose both, and they all serve us well. So I see this as a very positive omen of discernment, moving forward, and making positive choices in the time to come.
I think that's a very good omen, especially considering that this episode will land right before the new year.
Ooh.
Thank you all very much for joining us today, and we hope that you will come and join us again in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's video. If you like this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. You can also find more episodes on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast providers. You can find us on social media on Facebook and Twitter, or for more information, visit our website, triskelepodcast.weebly.com.